This tutorial is for a size medium, so to begin, we're going to be chaining 65 using our 7mm crochet hook. First, make a slip knot and then chain 65. 1, 2, 3. So go on ahead and I'll meet you guys back. We're going to be chaining 65 using our 7mm crochet hook. First, make a slip knot and then chain 65. 1, 2, 3. So go on ahead and I'll meet you guys back. So I have 65 chained up. Next up, flip your work. We're going to be working to the back bumps of the chains, and we're going to be working a stitch that has so many names: half double slip stitch, half slip stitch, yarn over slip stitch. But for this video, I'm going to be calling it yarn over slip stitch. So we're going to be working a yarn over slip stitch. So flip your work. To work the stitch, yarn over into the second chain from our hook. Remember, we're working to the back bump. Insert your hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, then pull through. That's a yarn over slip stitch. So a second time, yarn over into the back bump of the next chain, yarn over, pull up a loop, pull through. So we're going to continue putting one yarn over slip stitch in every single chain until we have 8 chains remaining unworked, and I'll meet you guys back for the next step. Okay, so I'm back and I have 8 chains remaining unworked. So we're going to be removing this hook, and then we're going to be grabbing our 6.5mm hook, and then we're going to be working slip stitches this time. So no more yarn over slip stitches, just plain slip stitches. So insert your hook into this back bump, the next, and then work a slip stitch. And I want you to go back, grab a stitch marker and attach it into this stitch. Okay, then continue with your 6.5mm hook and work slip stitches down the entire row. And when you get to the end, I'll meet you guys back so we can work row 2. So I'm at the end of row 1. You should have 56 yarn over slip stitches and 8 slip stitches. So to begin row 2, chain 1, and then into the first stitches, back loop from here and out. We're going to be working into the back loop of the stitches. So into the back loop of the first stitch, work 1 slip stitch. Next stitch, work another. So continue until you get to the stitch that has the stitch marker in. So just hit the stitch that has the stitch marker, remove the stitch marker, and then into the back loop of that stitch, work a slip stitch, and then go back, grab the marker and attach it to the front loop of the stitch. Alright. Okay, and we're going to be switching over to our 7mm hook, and we're going to be working back loop yarn over slip stitches in the next 36 stitches. So in the next 32 stitches. So I'm back and about to work my 30-second yarn over slip stitch. So before we start, we're going to be grabbing a stitch marker, and then we're going to be attaching it into the back loop of the stitch we're going to work into now. So attach into this back loop. Okay, and then yarn over and work a yarn over slip stitch into the stitch you attached a stitch marker into. So work. So at this point you should have 40 stitches in total, 8 slip stitches and 32 yarn over slip stitches. So next, chain 1 and then 10, yarn over, work yarn over slip stitch in the first stitch, continue and work your way across, and then when you get to the stitch that has the stitch marker, remember to change your hook and then work slip stitches. I'll meet you guys back at the end of the row so we can work row 3. So at the end of row 3, to begin row 4, chain 1, into the first stitch, work a back loop slip stitch. So continue, and when you work the stitch that has the stitch marker in, change your hook to the picker hook and then work back loop yarn over slip stitches until you work the last stitch of row 3, and I'll meet you guys back. So I just worked the last stitch of I just worked into the last stitch from row 3. At this point you should have 40 stitches, 8 slip stitches and 32 yarn over slip stitches. So we're going to be working an extra 2 stitches. So to work the next stitch, yarn over into this loop that we attached the stitch marker in from row 2, insert your hook into the loop and then remove the stitch marker, and then into the next stitch, the back loop of the next stitch, insert your hook. At this point you should have 4 loops on your hook, yarn over and then pull through every loop on your hook. Work next stitch, yarn over slip stitch, yarn over into the next back loop, work. Okay, before you work into the back loop, attach a stitch marker. So yarn over into the back loop, work. So this is the end of row 4. At this point you should have 42 stitches, 8 slip stitches and 34 yarn over slip stitches. So next, to begin row 5, chain 1, then turn your work, then into the first stitch, work yarn over slip stitch to the next stitch, work a yarn over slip stitch, continue and work your way across. And remember, when you hit the stitch that has the stitch marker in, remember to switch hooks and then switch over to the smaller hook and work slip stitches. I'll meet you guys back at the end so we can work row 6. I'm at the end of row 5. You should have 42 stitches, 34 yarn over slip stitches and 8 slip stitches. So to begin row 6, chain 1 and then turn your work, and into the first stitch we're going to be working a back loop slip stitch. Then continue until you get to the stitch that has the stitch marker in. So just hit the stitch that has the stitch marker in, remove the marker, and then work a back loop slip stitch in the stitch and attach your stitch marker back. And then switch over to the bigger hook, the 7mm hook, and then we're going to be working back loop only, yarn over slip stitches. So yarn over into the next stitch. So we're going to be working yarn over slip stitches until we get to the end, and I'll meet you guys back so we can complete the row. Guys, so I'm back and almost at the end of row 6, so we're going to be working 2 extra stitches. To work the first one, same as we did for row 3, we're going to be yarning over and then into this loop that has the stitch marker in, insert your hook and then remove the stitch marker. And then into the next available back loop from row 1, insert your hook. At this point you should have 4 loops on your hook. Yarn over, pull through everything, and to the next available loop, back loop, work a yarn over slip stitch. First, remember to attach the stitch marker into the loop before you work into it. So attach the stitch marker and then work the yarn over slip stitch. Then next up, chain 1 and then turn your work and put 1 yarn over slip stitch in the first stitch. Just continue and work your way across, and remember when you get to the stitch that has the stitch marker in, switch hooks and then work back loop slip stitches, and I'll meet you guys back at the end so we can work the next row. So I'm at the end of row 7, and to begin row 8, chain 1 and then we're going to work our way back up. Remember when you get to the stitch that has the stitch marker in, you remove the stitch marker, work the stitch and then change over to the bigger hook and work yarn over slip stitches up until the end of the row, and I'll meet you guys back for the next step. So I'm almost at the end of row 8. We're going to be working off 4 stitches from row 1. Usually we worked 2 stitches off, but we're going to be working 4 stitches off. So to work the first stitch, yarn over into this loop that has the stitch marker in, remove the stitch marker, and then into the next available stitch from row 1, insert your hook, yarn over, pull through all loops. Then we're going to work into the next stitch, work a back loop, yarn over, slip stitch to the third, and then before we work into the fourth, we're going to attach our stitch marker into the back loop of the stitch. and then work into the back loop. So at this point you should have 48 stitches, 8 slip stitches and 40 yarn over slip stitches. So to begin row 9, chain 1, and then turn our work. We're going to work our way back down. So remember, when you get to the stitch that has the stitch marker, you switch hooks and work regular slip stitches, and I'll meet you guys back at the end of the row so we can work the next. So I'm at the end of row 9, and we're going to be repeating row 8 and 9 till we get to row 16. So basically, to work row 10, we're going to chain 1 and then turn our work, and then we're going to work as normal. When you work the stitch that has the stitch marker in, switch hooks and then work up to this stitch. And remember, we're going to be working off 4 stitches from row 1, then chain 1 and work your way back down. So we're going to repeat going back and forth until we get to row 16. I'm back, and just in time for us to finish row 16 together. So yarn over into the loop that has the stitch marker in, insert your hook, remove the marker, then into the next available loop on row 1, yarn over, pull through all loops, then the second stitch, the third, and then the fourth. So we finished up working. So we're going to be attaching the stitch marker into the stitch. That's the last stitch we just worked. Now we're going to attach a stitch marker into the stitch. Why is this hard for me to attach? Okay. Yeah. To begin row 17, we're going to chain 1 and then turn our work, and into the first stitch's back loop we're going to work a yarn over slip stitch to the second. So continue and work your way down. Remember, when we get to this stitch we switch hooks and work slip stitches. When we get to the end, I'll meet you guys back so we can work row 18. At the end of row 17, so to begin row 18, chain 1, and then turn and into the first stitch, work a back loop slip stitch, and then as usual work your way up. When you get here, switch hooks and then begin working yarn over slip stitches, and then when you get to this end, I'll meet you guys back. I'm at the end of row 18. I forgot to mention this earlier, but at this point you should have 64 stitches, 8 slip stitches and 56 yarn over slip stitches. So we're going to be repeating row 17 and 18 for row 19 to row 39, and I'll meet you guys back. So I'm at the end of row 39. We're going to chain 1, and then we're going to turn our work, and we're going to work our way back up until we have 4 stitches remain unworked, and then I'll meet you guys back. So I have 4 stitches remain unworked. This is the end of row. This is the end of row 40. So at this point you should have 60 stitches. So to begin with 41, we're going to chain 1, and then we're going to turn our work, and then we're going to work our way back down. and I'll meet you guys back. So I'm at the end of row 41, and we're going to be repeating row 40 and 41 from row 42 to row 49. Basically a row of working our way back up until we have 4 stitches remaining unworked, and then chaining 1 and working our way back down. So continue, and I'll meet you guys at the end of row 49. I just finished up working a row 49. If you're working the same size as me, size medium, at this point you should have 44 stitches remaining. So to work row 50, we're going to chain 1, and then we're going to work our way up, and when we have 2 stitches remaining, I'll meet you guys back. So I'm at the end of row 50, and I have 42 stitches remaining. So to begin 51, we're going to chain 1, and then we're going to work our way back down for 51, and then we're going to repeat 50 and 51 for 52 to 53, and then I'll meet you guys back. So at the end of 53, to begin 54, we're going to insert, we're going to chain 1, and then we're going to turn our work, and we're going to work our way up, and then when we get to this last stitch, I'll meet you guys back for the next step. So I'm here and I'm done working. At this point you should have 40 stitches. So I'm going to insert my hook into this back loop that we've worked into. First of all, yarn over into the back loop, and then into this stitch from the short row we worked. Insert, and then I'm going to work a yarn over slip stitch, then yarn over into the next stitch, into the next back loop, insert, and work another yarn over slip stitch. And next up, I'm going to insert my hook into this loop that we've worked into, and then into the next available unworked stitch, and then work yarn over slip stitch, then into the next stitch, work another yarn over slip stitch, then I'm going to yarn over into this loop that we've worked into, and then into the stitch after that, work a yarn over slip stitch, and then to the next from the short row we worked, then into the last, and then I'm going to yarn over into the next, insert your hook, and then into the next unworked stitch from the short rows we worked, insert, and then work a yarn over slip stitch, and the next 3 stitches, we're done with this row. Yarn over into the next, insert your hook into this back loop that we've already worked into, and then into the next available unworked stitch from the short rows. We're done with this row, then yarn over into the next, to next last short row we worked. Okay, so you can see what we did here. So if you're working the same size as me, size medium, at this point you should have 64 stitches, the same number of stitches that we started with. So if you're working the same size as me, at this point you should have 64 stitches. So this is row 54. For 55 we're going to chain 1, and then we're going to work our way down. So I'm at the end of row 55, and that's the end. So what we're going to do is to chain 1 and then cut. Oh yeah. And then we're going to repeat the steps for a second panel. For a second panel I have already made mine, so go ahead and repeat the previous steps for a second body panel, and then I'll meet you guys back. For our sleeve, I'm going to be using black for the sleeve, so we're going to make a slip knot, and then we're going to chain 85. Okay, so I have chained 85. We're going to work into the second chain from our hook. We're going to be turning our chain, and then we're going to work into the back bump. So insert your hook into the back bump of the second chain from our hook, and then work a yarn over slip stitch. Yarn over into the next back bump, insert your hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, then pull through all the loops again into this, pull up a loop, and then pull through. So continue and then work your way across the entire thing until you have 8 chains remaining unworked, and then work slip stitches, and I'll meet you guys back. Okay, so I have 8 chains remaining unworked, so I'm going to remove the 7mm hook, and then I'm going to switch to the 6.5mm hook, and then rather than working yarn over slip stitches, I'm going to be working slip stitches. So insert your hook into the next back bump and work a slip stitch. So next, insert your hook into the back bump and then work a slip stitch. So continue and work your way across the entire chains.